One drunken night, Calvin agreed to my confession of love. 3 days later, he followed his crush Gina abroad. He only sent me a voice message, "Sorry, Rachel, you deserve someone better." And just like that, I got dumped, becoming a laughingstock in his circle of friends. 2 years later, Calvin returned. At the welcoming party, I quietly listened to people around me praising the perfect match they made. It seemed like they were purposely saying it for me to hear. When Calvin, with his arm around another woman's waist, noticed me, he looked surprised. "Rachel, you're not still upset about what happened, right?" He apologized, saying he had made a hasty decision 2 years ago, and we could still be friends. It sounded like he thought I was a clingy person. I didn't respond, and my phone rang right on cue. Being a bit hard of hearing, I usually put calls on speakerphone. As soon as I answered, a magnetic voice filled the room. "Honey, where are you? I'll come to pick you up." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Someone whispered, "That voice is so nice." Before another word could be uttered, the person beside him elbowed him. Gina, however, looked up and stared at me. "That voice sounds very familiar." All eyes turned to her, including mine. Gina smiled in disbelief and said, "The one you were talking to must be Mark, right?" The atmosphere stiffened. Calvin furrowed his brow. "Mark," hearing her, languidly replied from the other end of the call, "It's me." I calmly gave him an address and hung up. Calvin stared at me, slightly skeptical, and said, "You're married?" "Yes," I replied, looking at him, took a sip of my drink, and smiled. "My husband is coming to pick me up, so I won't disturb you all. I'll leave first." As I got up, Calvin stopped me and turned to me with a slightly dark expression, sneering, "Marrying too soon can lead to regrets, remember what you said?" He seemed a bit out of control, but Gina held his arm, whispering something in his ear. I shrugged it off and retorted, "People change." Then I left. I really couldn't understand Calvin's way of thinking. 2 years ago, he left without a word, causing me to be mocked for so long. Now, how could he still have the face to question me? Outside the restaurant, the cold wind with a light drizzle hit my face, so I pulled my hat down. That Mark, so cunning. I thought to myself, but he arrived right on time. A black Bentley maneuvered past some obstacles and stopped in front of me. The driver's window slowly rolled down, and a hand reached out, elegantly long fingers with a porcelain wrist adorned with a watch. I opened the car door and got in. As the air conditioning filled the car, I was instantly enveloped in warmth and a pleasant, cool fragrance. "You're quite the actress." I got goosebumps hearing that, "Honey," I said after scanning the person in front. "How did it go?" Mark asked, tilting his head. Recalling the scene, I replied, "Well, I'd say it was worth $100. I won't let you down." "Surprised your voice is so recognizable. I knew it was you right away." His tone was casual, indicating he was used to such situations. I was amazed. "So, your distraught state 2 years ago was because of him?" Mark held the steering wheel with one hand and took a different direction to speak in an onlooker's tone and demeanor. I pondered, "Probably. But rest assured, I won't do anything to betray you as long as we're legally husband and wife. You have a vivid imagination. I'm fine with it if you want to play around." Shifting slightly forward, I gazed at Mark's profile, asking, "Are we breaking up?" "We were never together," he lazily replied, "because of a document temporarily holding us back. What we had arranged 2 years ago was just a timing issue." After a pause, I said, "Right now, it might be a bit difficult." "Why?" The car stopped at a red light, and Mark shrugged. "Your long-lost love returned. Shouldn't you be eager to break free from this entanglement?" Without hesitation, I retorted, "What long-lost love? He embarrassed me so much 2 years ago. Do you think I would eagerly rush back to cling to him?" Mark glanced at me sideways and was about to speak when a horn suddenly sounded beside us, prompting us to both turn our heads. A Land Rover had just pulled up next to us, and after Calvin glanced at us and stared at Mark for several seconds, he finally glanced at me with a smirk. What a coincidence. I didn't bother to respond. Gina, sitting in the passenger seat, briefly glanced at me and then back at Mark. "Long time no see. Did they know each other too?" I looked at Mark in confusion. Mark thought for a moment. We've met? As expected. Gina was stunned for a moment and then smiled. Sorry for the intrusion. Meanwhile, Calvin gave me another glance, which I ignored. Annoyed, I tapped the steering wheel impatiently. At that moment, the traffic light turned green, and he drove off first. I let out a sigh of relief. That was odd. By the way, how does Gina know you? Who is Gina? Mark and I ended up getting married by chance. 2 years ago, when Calvin had just gone abroad, I was immersed in profound sorrow. Walking alone in the street, I cursed him 1,000 times from head to toe. Lost in my tirade, I accidentally stepped on a dog. It barked a few times, snapping me out of it. When I looked up, I met the eyes of the handsome guy munching on a piece of bread across from me. Mark was lazily holding the dog's leash with one finger and chewing on the bread, his mouth moving slowly. I apologized, and he shook his head. Suddenly, a yell came from behind him. Mark ran with the dog, and I instinctively followed suit, running and panting heavily. After hiding in a bubble tea shop, Mark, looking less tired, stared outside and asked, "Why were you following me?" Confused, my first thought was, after running for so long, that's the question I get. Then I realized, why did I run after him for so long? I fell silent. Mark had nothing to say either. Wiping the sweat off, I prepared to leave, but he stopped me. Are you single? I was puzzled. What's wrong? Marry me. It was totally out of the blue. My immediate refusal was on the tip of my tongue. No. 2 million. He added. I squatted back, shaking my head. Sure, handsome. I can lose a lot of love in my life, but how much money can I make? And just like that, we became nominal husband and wife. Mark said he wouldn't restrict me and could leave when the time was right. It was truly a foolproof deal. The car slowly drove into the villa area. I was stunned. Isn't this where you live? Why are you bringing me here? You'll be sleeping here tonight. I glanced at him, hesitated to speak. The car stopped in front of the villa. I sat still and didn't move. Mark, impatient, leaned over and looked at me through the car window. Do you want me to carry you down? I immediately shook my head. No, no. Mark, how can you be so unreliable? Forget what you promised in the beginning. I never expected you to be like this. His face expressionless. You said so much and I didn't understand a word. Is it my IQ or is something wrong with your brain? I looked at him without saying anything. After a few seconds of eye contact, he realized, raising an eyebrow slightly, Rachel, do I look so indiscriminate? I quietly got out of the car. The villa was brightly lit, illuminating every corner. Just as I entered the gate, a woman in a nightgown came down the stairs, clearly just finished bathing. Her skin was very fair, incredibly beautiful. I immediately turned back and bumped into Mark face to face. He looked up, and I awkwardly said, Did I come back at a bad time, disturbing you guys? Mark looked past me. Where are you alone? The woman's voice was soft. He's still showering upstairs. I frowned, a bit bewildered by what I heard. The sound of a door closing behind me. Mark looked at me and said calmly, You'll sleep on the 3rd floor, there's a bathroom there too. I nodded and followed him. Passing the 2nd floor I heard the sound of showering, couldn't help but ask, You don't live alone here? The one you just saw was my sister, Linda. She just got off the plane tonight and will stay here for the night. I nodded thoughtfully and sighed, Your sister is really beautiful. Mark turned back. I hesitated for a moment, smiled and corrected, Our sister is really beautiful. They won't leave until noon tomorrow. Mark led me to the room, entered the bathroom, checking if the shower was working properly, and continued, You need to think quickly, Linda is pretty smart. I raised an eyebrow. Why only pretty smart? Because I'm smarter. After showering, I sat in front of the dressing table and earnestly removed my makeup. A message popped up from Sam. He was close to Calvin. Even when Calvin went abroad, they still kept in touch. Originally, Calvin deleted me right after sending a voice message, probably afraid Gina would see it. I simply blocked him and closed all the ways he could add me. Sam's message was short and to the point, informing me to open the friend adding feature. Someone wanted to add me. I replied, not adding. He responded quickly, really? What if it's Calvin who wants to add you? Since school, he loved to use Calvin to pressure me. Even now, even though he knew what Calvin did 2 years ago. I calmly typed back, even if your dad wants to add me, it's a no. He didn't message again. I lay back on the bed and fell asleep peacefully. I am particular about my bed, tossing and turning until around 1 in the morning before falling asleep. The next day, I washed my face without looking in the mirror, heading downstairs with messy hair. When I saw Linda downstairs, neatly dressed and pouring milk, I suddenly snapped out of it. I'm treating this place like my own home. Linda happened to look up. There were many ways to die of embarrassment. Why did it have to be this? But Linda seemed unfazed. She smiled gently. She was particularly beautiful, with exquisite features like a movie star. There was a resemblance in features between her and Mark. Their genes were really good. Come have breakfast, Rachel, she said. I awkwardly smoothed my hair and pointed upstairs. You guys go ahead, I'll go fix my hair. No need. She stopped me and said, it's more convenient downstairs. Let me help you with it. Thank you. I was somewhat taken aback by the kindness. Another man was sitting at the dining table, head down reading the newspaper, not joining the conversation, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, handsome and refined. When Linda was pouring milk earlier, she slightly leaned forward, and he reached out to grasp her waist to prevent her from falling. It was obvious, he was Mark's brother-in-law. After taking a seat, I asked with a hint of confusion, where's Mark? As soon as the words left my mouth, Linda and her brother-in-law looked at me, and Linda spoke first. He showers early every morning, don't you know? How can you miss this detail? I nervously chuckled. I didn't sleep well last night. I completely forgot in an instant. Didn't sleep well? Linda lowered her head to stir the milk with a spoon, laughing. Then his energy levels should be pretty good. Mark just happened to come downstairs at this point, completely missing the conversation we had. He pulled out a chair and sat down, grabbed a sandwich and took a bite. Linda took a sip of milk, looked up and asked, how long have you two been married? I was genuinely puzzled. It's been over 2 years, Mark, 846 days. With a thoughtful nod, Linda said, remember to visit home. I heard Mom complain that you haven't visited in a while. Straightening my back at her words, I agreed, true. Then I turned to Mark with a gentle smile, let's visit home tomorrow. Mark nodded, then placed a peeled boiled egg in my plate, smiling, have one, it's good for protein. I was caught off guard, looking at him with eyes wide, raising an eyebrow slightly. This gesture was met with significant meaning from the couple across us. After everyone left, I slumped back. Are we really going to your house tomorrow? Mark shook his head, no need, I'll take care of it. He stood up, let's go, I'll drive you back to the office. Back at the company, a colleague excitedly approached me and said, Rachel, great news. What's that? She was beaming, we have a new handsome-looking manager. I wasn't particularly interested and his name sounds really nice too. Her head bobbing, she smiled broadly, Calvin, what do you think? I raised my voice, who? My reaction startled Jack, who was behind me. He poked me, Calvin, what's wrong, don't you like the name? I rubbed my temples, feeling defeated. Everything was fine, why this sudden change? In the next moment, a deep voice sounded behind me, Rachel. I rolled my eyes dramatically and turned around, yes? Come to my office. My colleague whispered on the side, he's getting more handsome the more you look at him. Calvin stood in front of the desk, looking at me, before finally speaking, are you still angry about what happened 2 years ago? I smiled, no, I'm not that petty. Rachel, your marriage to Mark is fake, isn't it? He asked again, a bit hurried. I replied seriously, it's real, I'm curious, why are you fixated on this? Calvin shook his head, chuckled lightly, and said, you're probably trying to fool me. Mark is not an ordinary person. His net worth can even be found online. It's completely impossible for you to marry him. I sneered, what do you mean? Do you think I'm not good enough for him? Rachel. He repeated my name softly, looking like he was considering my feelings. You know very well the difference between you and him. I'm not belittling you, just stating a fact to counter your argument. I responded, so what? Why do you care who I marry? Calvin stayed quiet for a few seconds. You don't like him. You don't think I still like you, right? He said, I came back this time because you came back. Add my contact information first. I pursed my lips. Have you ever thought about how Gina would feel hearing what you just said? He paused, then continued calmly, she doesn't matter. I looked at him, you're really annoying. Facing my direct criticism, Calvin remained unruffled and asked, did Mark threaten you with something? No, I really like him, you can't fool me, Rachel. He lowered his head and smiled, then raised his eyes without a trace of amusement. Stay away from him and come here. I asked, are you having a brain malfunction or are you naturally a jerk who likes to play mind games with me? I warn you not to act up again, Calvin, or I don't mind settling the scores from the past 2 years. After saying that, I turned around to leave. Calvin suddenly grabbed my wrist, pulled me into his arms. He lowered his head, covered my mouth with his finger, looking annoyed. Rachel, can you listen to me for a moment? After a pause, his voice softened. I missed you a lot in the U.S. Do you have any idea how many times I felt lost without you? Can you forgive me for my mistake and give us a chance to start over? As he finished speaking, Calvin suddenly let go of me, bowed his head, and covered his head, shrinking a bit. I was stunned for a moment and turned around. Gina was standing outside the office looking at us. Beside her stood a person, playing with a small slingshot on the desk. Then he glanced over and smiled. Mark. Calvin frowned, looking at them. He rubbed the back of his head and lowered his voice by a degree. Was it you who did it? Mark, still in a casual posture leaning against the desk, retorted, are you in the office fighting with a married woman to be the third party? I pondered on why Mark would be here, but I guessed it was because of Gina. Calvin stared coldly at him. Do you both really think I'm easy to deceive? Mark pondered for a moment and then looked at Calvin's forehead. Do you actually have a problem with your brain? Calling names isn't scary. What's scary is that Mark sounded so damn sincere, as if genuinely concerned about Calvin's mental state. Clearly getting annoyed, Calvin took a deep breath, then mocked, Mark, if you have so much free time, find something better to do. As an outsider, you are not suited to be here. I won't bother with your previous behavior just because you are young. Please leave. Comparing the two, Calvin was indeed older, 2 years older than Mark and me. When we were freshmen, Mark was a sophomore. Hearing this, Mark raised the slingshot again at him. Calvin instinctively raised his hand to block. Mark chuckled smugly, then gently tossed the slingshot aside, stood up, and motioned to me, step outside. As I took a step, Calvin reached out to pull me, but I quickly avoided him, reminding, keep your distance. Passing by Gina, she smiled at me. Mark stood by the company's front desk and pushed a bag towards me. I looked at him skeptically. It's from my mom. I nodded knowingly and said, she asked me why you didn't come. I told her that you were busy working, so she spent 15 minutes making this lunch box for you. I couldn't help but smile. Mark continued, if you find the current situation too annoying, you can come to my company. His offer surprised me a bit, but I shook my head and declined, no need, I can handle it. He didn't say more, nodded and then left. Watching his back, I felt some emotions. Mark had a very handsome face, and I had always thought Calvin was the best-looking guy I had seen until I met Mark and realized there are better men out there. Mark was superior in every way, even that mole on his chin overshadowed Calvin's features, I kid you not. He always had admirers around him, and in his circle, he was known as the most talented one, although our fake marriage had put a barrier on his love life for the past 2 years. I had seen women try to get his attention before. Recently, when Mark brought up the timing to me, I figured he had realized it too and felt like it was time to move on and not waste his prime years. I thought about it, feeling like I shouldn't hold him back. After work, I took a shower at home, wrapped my head in a towel, sat on the couch with some potato chips in my mouth, holding the remote to find something to watch. After flipping through some shows, I settled on a variety show. Just as I was finally starting to relax, my phone on the coffee table vibrated. In that moment, the one thing I wished for the most was a regret pill, especially now that I regretted not setting my phone to silent during this moment where I could finally unwind. Pausing the show, I resignedly picked up my phone. It was a text message. "It's Calvin. I've been thinking about why you're so angry. Is it because of my decision to go with Gina when we went abroad? I was impulsive back then, but later on, I realized that you were the first thing on my mind when I was abroad." I chuckled coldly and typed, "I remember what you said the night you came back." About 2 minutes later, he replied, "I was testing your reaction, Rachel. We can work through these issues you care about at our own pace. No need, I don't care anymore. Do you think the outcomes are all the same and you and Gina are somewhat similar?" "Not the same. She's Gina, I'm your dad." Calvin didn't reply, probably because I didn't have the patience to wait for his response and decided to block him right away. For 4 years of college, I was always by Calvin's side. At the time, I often wondered why I couldn't confess my affection for him. Truth be told, I wasn't really smitten with him. I had a reason for sticking around him, a reason so poignant that even death would shed tears upon hearing it. Calvin and I met in our freshman year of high school. My initial impression of him was that he had a nice face but seemed quite gloomy. And indeed, he was gloomy because his grandfather had been bedridden for a long time, with little time left, and he had the closest bond with his grandpa. Since our homes were close, would occasionally accompany Calvin to visit his grandfather during our free time. In the last 3 months of our senior year, Calvin started dating a girl from our class. One Friday, the girl coaxed him into joining her for some shopping, so Calvin asked me to visit the hospital on his behalf. On my way there, I was thinking of an excuse, but to my surprise, his grandfather saw right through me. He mentioned that he knew his grandson was in a relationship. When Calvin took care of him at his bedside, he would often get distracted and even smile foolishly. My emotions were mixed. "Grandpa, he'll be here any minute now." Grandpa interrupted me, his voice weak, but he managed to smile. "Grandpa, I'm feeling weak." "Rachel, you're a good girl. What worries me the most is Calvin. So, Grandpa hopes that after I'm gone, you'll stay with him, supervise him, and make sure he doesn't veer off the right path at crucial times, okay?" I nodded solemnly. Calvin arrived 20 minutes later, then knelt by the bedside for a long time, tears streaming down his face. It was evident that he was regretful because he had broken up with that girl. While the girl was pulling at him and crying her heart out, Calvin seemed to suddenly harden his heart and show no emotion. I was there at that time as well. This led to rumors spreading that I had caused their breakup. Later on, Calvin and I both got accepted to the same university. By this time, influenced by his friends, he already had a faint belief that I harbored feelings for him. I couldn't be bothered to explain since my mission was almost complete. I'm so fed up with him now. Until I met Gina. Beautiful and gentle Gina, a woman any man would be drawn to, including Calvin. I took some comfort in the fact that Calvin would likely use pursuing Gina and keeping a distance from me as an excuse to cut ties. After all, in the eyes of him and his friends, I was the one who had silently longed for him for years without getting a response, willingly bearing it. Allie planned to leave heartbroken and icy cold when that happened. The plan really was perfect. But reality always brings surprises. Calvin, relying on his good looks and stubborn nature, openly pursued Gina for a long time. But he got rejected. Devastated, he went out drinking and got completely wasted. When I received the call and went to see him, my patience was wearing thin, and my irritation almost made my head explode. I almost wanted to hit him with the bottle to wake him up. "Are you out of your mind, drinking so much? Drinking is one thing, but why call me when you know so many other people?" I sounded especially impatient. So when Calvin raised his head drowsily and asked, "How long have you liked me?" and then nodded, saying, "So let's go out," did he think I was there to confess my feelings to him? Looking at the bottles on the table, I contemplated whether this constituted intentional harm, but considering his drunken stupor and my own commitment to good morals, I let him off the hook. I never expected that Calvin would wake up the next day and publicly announce our relationship. I had been sleeping so soundly, and when I woke up, the messages were all congratulatory, wishing me fulfillment of my desires. Suddenly, my boss called urgently. "Rachel. Are you rejecting your salary?" I swallowed my pride and rushed to the company. I sat down in the office, seriously reconsidering the situation. At least we met, I thought. I should give him face for now, act along, and then break up with him in a couple of days, using the excuse of not being compatible. When he heard that Gina was going abroad, he didn't hesitate and followed Hermie principles, told me that I should curse Calvin with the most vicious words in the world. But my reason told me that it was all no big deal, at least I had rid myself of him. Little did I know that 2 years later, he would come back, not only come back but also seek attention from me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. So when Mark called, I instinctively said, "Speak up." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then another person's voice chimed in with a chuckle. "Seems like you're under someone's thumb, huh?" I retorted, "Mark, you're crazy. Why are you insulting people?" He then said, "Get ready, I'll come pick you up later." I nodded and then quickly changed my clothes, applied light makeup, and turned off the TV show I hadn't started watching yet. Mark arrived promptly, and my first question upon getting in the car was asking why we were suddenly going somewhere. "It's my mom's birthday today," he replied. I was taken aback, clicking my tongue. "That's not nice. Even though we're not real, at least it appears that way to others. Not inviting me on such an important day for your mom. Do you realize how people will judge me for not being there with you?" While listing off criticisms like rude, disrespectful to elders, too indifferent, I escalated to the suspicion that we might have a phony marriage. Mark tilted his head. "Don't you usually not care about what others say about you?" It stemmed from a comment I made 2 years ago. The first time Mark took me to meet his parents, I met a little girl there. We chatted happily on the way down. She expressed her troubles to me, explaining that her parents wanted her to learn certain things so she wouldn't be embarrassed compared to other girls. Yet, she wasn't interested in those subjects. I told her, "If you don't like it, don't learn it. You'll be pointed at and talked about by uncles and aunties. I don't care. No matter what unrelated people say, the spit they produce is just bacteria to you. Just throw a cup of disinfectant back on their faces." The little girl looked at me admiringly. "Rachel, I wish I could be as cool as you." Coming back to reality, I cleared my throat lightly. Times have changed. Now I have to accumulate merits for myself. The car smoothly turned a corner and stopped at a pair of green plants. I took a deep breath. "Are you nervous?" Mark asked. I shook my head, a prelude to the act before a play. As soon as I got out of the car, someone was waving at me at the doorstep. Staring at the somewhat familiar face, I pulled Mark's hand. "Who's that?" Mark looked in that direction. "The one you were chatting with the most." "Oh, she's grown up so fast, towering over me now." I walked over with a big smile, and Coco lovingly took my hand. "Rachel, long time no see. Do you still remember me?" My heart thanked Mark 100 times before replying, "Of course I remember. Look at how much you've grown." Coco pursed her lips and then said, "Come on, the uncles are waiting for you." Inside. The room was crowded. Besides Mark's parents, there was Linda sitting next to them, and I hardly recognized anyone else. "Rachel," Mark's mother waved at me with a smile. "It's been a long time. Mark told me you've been very busy. Come, sit with me and chat." My only thought as I moved closer was, fake marriage can really be deadly. My social skills are the worst, but my acting skills are the best. My mom used to say I should have been sent to the entertainment industry. As they brought out the cake to cut, Mark sat opposite me the whole time, listening attentively to others, leaning his elbow on his knee, slightly bending forward, while friends next to him chatted happily. He rarely smiled, picked up his juice from the table, took a sip, and then continued to hold it, gently shaking the juice while listening intently. His black wristwatch made his skin look very white, with a touch of elegance. I wanted to go to the bathroom midway, and Coco took me, but on the way back, she was stopped by someone. I glanced at the stranger, a face I didn't recognize, similar in age to Coco, dressed beautifully and with a haughty tone. "Coco, why do you always act so timid? It's embarrassing." Upon hearing this, Coco tightened her grip on my hand. I thought this person was just looking for trouble and asked, "Embarrassing? In what way?" "She's the embarrassing one, from head to toe." The girl with the glass of wine walked over, smirked, and I reached out to stop her from doing anything. I sigh, what era are we living in? That idle drama trick is outdated. Why bother? Her face stiffened, she finished the remaining juice in her cup, and coldly replied, "I'm not that boring." "Yeah, sure thing, whatever." I held Coco's hand and left. Coco's voice was still soft. "Thank you, Rachel. Nothing to thank me for. I've noticed your personality, don't be too weak, it makes you an easy target for bullying." She said softly, "Everyone sees her as an outstanding child, even my mom likes her, and I'm a bit afraid of her." I frowned. "What's there to be afraid of? It's mainly because your mom likes her, right? Even if your mom likes her, it's not as much as she likes her own child, so are you overshadowed by your mom?" She was very downcast, nodding in response to my words. "My mom puts a lot of pressure on me. She controls every aspect of my words and actions, can't make a single mistake." I furrowed my brows. What kind of suffocating education is this? "Rachel, is your mom like this?" I shook my head. "My mom always says I was sent by God to punish her." Coco laughed. "It seems like your mom really gets irritated by you." Indeed. I remembered the argument I had with Mary 2 months ago. It was about dating. I didn't tell her about Mark and me because she would have roasted me alive. At the time, there was a suitor who came to my house every day, and my mom really liked him. She spent a long time advising me, but when I firmly rejected him, she got angry and started listing my faults, from character flaws to household chores. "My mom, with your traits, if you can't see the good in others, they won't see it in you either." I bent down to find something, unfazed. "I don't need his approval. I didn't say I look down on him, I just don't like him." "My mom, no man will like you in the future with that attitude." My unique logic was incomprehensible to my mom, and I had no intention of reasoning with her. Lost in thought, I drank a large glass of wine, only to wake up abruptly as the sharp taste hit me. Coco stared at me in shock. "Rachel, you're drinking alcohol." "I know. I've lived for over 20 years without losing, but tonight, I lost to a glass of wine." As Mark took me from Coco, he stared at me for 2 seconds. "Your alcohol tolerance is this low?" I looked up at him and chuckled. "Hello handsome, first time we've met, care to exchange contact info?" Someone behind us spoke, but I couldn't hear clearly. I quietly snuggled into Mark's arms, then he lifted me off the ground. As we exited the villa, a cold wind blew, and I shrank into his embrace, murmuring, "It's cold, seriously, even stepmothers don't do this." Mark carried me towards the car and teased, "I've become your mom now?" "You already were." I mumbled in a daze. He gently placed me in the passenger seat, then leaned down to fasten my seatbelt. His scent became more pleasant as I drifted back to sleep. In the middle of the journey, I woke feeling cold and a bit thirsty. "Why didn't you cover me with a blanket?" "I want some water." The car drove steadily, and Mark replied, "Soon." I dozed off again, and only woke up when he carried me out of the car. I shifted position, wrapping my arms around Mark's neck and leaning on him. He stumbled momentarily but steadied himself, his face emotionless as he reached for the light switch on the wall. Before he could touch it, my body leaned against him, my hair falling over his shoulder. Normally, I would explode in such a situation, but Mark didn't. He had an unusually laid-back attitude. His face may give off a playful vibe, but it was just an illusion. Unable to resist, I squirmed against him, making faces, to which Mark quickly warned, "If you kiss me, I'll throw you out of here." My lips brushed against his neck, and I curled up closer to him, saying, "So cold, Mom, get me a blanket quickly." As I spoke, I reached to pull Mark's coat, prompting him to grab my hand and lead me to the bedroom. With the lights still off, he gently laid me on the bed, and I stubbornly held on to his coat, deeply asleep. Mark tried to tug it away, but couldn't. Are you really asleep or just pretending? A person with a foggy mind can't muster that much strength. I couldn't hear his murmuring, just knew someone was trying to steal my money. You, trying to steal my money? You might as well just die. When I woke up, my head was throbbing, and I rubbed my temples, combing my hair. My gaze wandered around the room. Is this where Mark lives? I take a deep breath, trying hard to remember what happened last night, but unfortunately, I can't recall anything. As I get out of bed, I notice a tiny silver chain on the floor next to my slippers. I squint instinctively. That's not from my clothes, there's no zipper. Could it be Mark's? Walking out of the room, I see Mark sitting at the dining table, holding a small knife cutting toast. It makes me inexplicably anxious. Good morning, I greet him. Mark looks up, the tip of the knife offering me a slice. I quickly wave it off, saying, "It's fine, I can do it myself." Awake now, huh? Not easy, he remarks before taking a bite. Definitely being sarcastic, I pull out a chair and sit down, tentatively asking, "I didn't do anything last night, did I?" Mark lowers his head, continuing to cut the toast, and shakes his head, "No." I feel half relieved, then he adds, "Just kept calling my mom in the middle of the night." I put down my chopsticks, strongly suppressing the shame, and say coldly, "Let's get divorced, right away." Mark looks at me, nods resolutely, "Okay." Staring at my plate, I silently vow 1,000 times not to touch alcohol again. But we didn't end up divorcing because we both received a phone call at the same time, and after hanging up, we exchanged a glance across the table. Very taciturn. Calvin stopped me at work, a faint stubble grew on his chin, making him look a bit disheveled. "Rachel, can you accompany me today?" I try to leave, but he grabs my wrist, to visit my grandpa. I stop in my tracks. Turning back, I pull my hand back, saying calmly, "Calvin, even though you're not great, at least you have some conscience. Go by yourself, we're done, and don't touch me so easily, I can sue you for harassment." Calvin's gaze lands on my face, looking very complicated. After a while, he hoarsely laughs and shakes his head, "Rachel, you've changed." I nod, "That's right, I'm not the same as you used to know, so stop bothering me." As we part ways, he still can't help but ask, "Did you really marry Mark?" "Yes, we are truly in love, never parting for eternity," I reply. After work, I take Bingo to the pet store for a bath. As I come out carrying it, I run into Gina. She's smiling, "Meeting again?" I nod politely, ready to leave, when Gina stops me, "Rachel, that's your name, right?" I nod, "Yes." "Do you dislike me a lot?" she asks. "Not really. There was nothing between me and Calvin." She looks at me, explaining seriously, "Even during those 2 years abroad, we never confirmed a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, he was always chasing after me." I raise an eyebrow lightly, "So?" "I just wanted to make it clear, Calvin's always liked you," she laughs lightly, "Maybe you find it absurd, because I do too, that's what I also think." Gina smiles gently, "I hope you don't misunderstand, and I'm surprised about you and Mark." I look at her. She lowers her eyelashes, "Mark and I were at the same college, we only had one class together. He was quite popular at our school back then, to an unimaginable extent, declaring his love on the confession wall countless times a day. Even though I'm not interested in basketball, I would make time every day to pass by the court just to see him. He was good at basketball, good at everything, but not at flirting with girls. Every day I could see glimpses of him in various reposted photos, blurry or clear, but the chance of actually meeting him in person was very rare." She smiles, "Every day back then, it felt like he was a big star appearing only in your phone, but had no connection to your life." That realization struck me. That's why Gina didn't like Calvin, because she had met Mark long before. In her youth. He was probably an unparalleled existence to her. Realizing this, I suddenly felt a bit complex. I wanted to say that Mark and I were about to break up, our relationship was a mere formality, and she could boldly pursue him later. But before I could speak, Gina interrupted me, gently saying, "You and him really suit each other, Rachel. Have you been told that you're very pretty?" I hesitate for a moment, then reply, yes, but not too often. Gina looks surprised. Is it that my taste is too unconventional? No, your taste is very conventional, because I firmly believe that I'm beautiful. Gina looks at her phone, then suddenly asks, a friend invited me to play pool. Do you want to join us? No thanks, I decline softly, shaking Bingo in my arms. I have to take this little one home. Gina seems to just notice it, and exclaims, it's so cute, I really like it. How about I play with it? Let me hold it. When someone praises Bingo, I'm easily swayed. In this state, I'm the most approachable. So I agree. Of course, the main reason is Gina's beautiful and gentle smile. I can't refuse. If there was a machine to measure how much I like boys and girls, I'd probably be 80% towards girls. I rarely go to entertainment places, and when Gina leads me inside, 3 eye-catching words hang there. Weekday 8. The name is unique, and the place is upscale. It's crowded inside, almost every table is occupied, with the sound of pool balls clashing. Bingo squirms in my arms, and I pat its head gently, avoiding the people focused on playing. Walking towards the center of the room, Gina waves to her friends and then pulls me along. Her friend asks, who's this? Gina replies, my friend, here to play with me. I give a polite smile. Gina doesn't start playing immediately. Instead, she takes Bingo from me and plays with it for a while. When she's done, she turns to her friend and asks, why don't you go to the second floor? It's too crowded down here, and it smells like sweat. The second floor is full too. I heard there are some big shots there. They've reserved half of the place. But I have money, I can be just as willful. I suddenly need to use the restroom urgently, but with the first floor being crowded without any available stalls, I have to go to the second floor. My mom once said that the most perfect thing I've ever done in my life was messing with other people's business. It seems like a prophecy that has been following me, as I noticed something before going to the bathroom. A woman was leaning over playing pool, while the man beside her was chatting with others and casually had his hand on her lower back. Then slowly moved his hand down. It was noisy in the room, with all kinds of voices. No one would notice what happened. The woman just moved away without making a scene, while the man continued to follow her slowly. It was at that moment I threw my bag at him. It hit him right on target and he cursed. This action caused a stir, the room quieted slightly, and all eyes turned in our direction, landing on me. Did you throw that? The man who got hit started yelling. My bag sadly lay on the floor. The woman picked it up and tried to hand it to me, but the man pushed her away and then headed towards me. When he was about 3 steps away from me, I remained calm. Just a step away, I slapped him. He was taken aback. The surroundings strangely quieted down, and the way people looked at me was like I was a crazy person. But just as I was about to move my fingers, shocked by my own unconscious action, a voice cut in, Jack, I just noticed Mark over there. He was in the furthermost corner, holding a pool cue, looking over in our direction. There were many people around him, both men and women, with the men smoking and getting ready to watch the show, and a couple of women looking surprised with their hands raised, but my focus was on how pretty their manicures were. Oh, obviously Jack was the sleazy guy in front of me. He was wearing a yellow tank top, with large tattoos running down his arm from his shoulder, looking tough, like one of those gangsters from the past. Now, when I noticed Mark, I felt a bit nervous. And when Jack was called by Mark, his aggressiveness visibly lessened, but he still said in a cold voice, apologize to me. I'm not apologizing to a jerk, I said. Mark started walking over. Jack laughed at my words, not feeling ashamed at all. After he finished laughing, he said with a hint of anger, do you know I've been in jail before? Do you want to know what I did to end up there? I didn't show the fearful expression he expected, as it was the first time I had seen someone so eager to reveal their dirty deeds as if they were treasures, so I calmly replied, you must have done something that deserved divine retribution. When Mark arrived, he calmed down Jack's brewing anger, exchanged a glance with him, and Jack turned away holding in his frustration. I cleared my throat and said, coincidentally, you're here to play pool too. Mark asked, I am here to play pool, but are you here to start a fight? That question made me suddenly feel the urge to go to the bathroom again. I chuckled and said, "Oh, I said I came here to use the restroom, do you believe me?" Gina showed up at that moment and said, "Rachel, why haven't you come down yet?" Her voice stopped abruptly when she saw Mark. I quickly turned around and left for the bathroom. When I came out, the second floor had returned to its previous atmosphere. As if nothing had happened just now, Gina was holding my bag, her eyes following the people inside it. I walked up to her without her noticing. "Gina," I called out. She snapped out of her trance, still looking in that direction, and said softly, "So that person having the private room just now was Mark. Are you going to stay here?" I shook my head. "No, he can do his thing, and I'll do mine." Saying that, I turned my head to look. Mark was still attracting attention among the mingling crowd, readying to hit a ball, refusing a cigarette offered to him on the side. Then he made a precise shot. I was too far to see clearly, but from the sudden whistling and applause around, I understood it must have been impressive. Mark remained calm, his body straight, with just a profile. He was outstanding. His eyebrow bones and nose looked perfect, surrounded by a thick fog of smoke that slowly enveloped him, but he didn't mind. With one hand gripping the cue, in his other hand he pulled out his phone and casually tapped on it. After finishing, he put away his phone and prepared to hit the ball again. At that moment, my phone in the bag rang. A message from 2 seconds ago. "Wait." After Gina and the others left first, I waited on the first floor for Mark. It was almost 10:30, people started coming down from the second floor one by one. No one noticed me, but Mark looked at me the moment he came into view, then tilted his head to whisper to the person beside him. When everyone left the pool hall, Mark turned towards me and grabbed a drink from the front counter. With a slight tug on the ring pull, he took a sip before walking towards me. I raised my chin towards him. "Darling, did you make me wait just to personally take me home?" That term of endearment made him pause for a moment and look at me. "You don't blush when you flirt." "I don't think that was flirting," I replied. I stood up and hugged Bingo, who was still asleep, and headed outside with Mark following behind me. A staff member called him, looking quite familiar with him, and said something in dialect, which made him chuckle. I didn't really catch what was said, but Mark understood and lightly smirked, then took out his car keys and continued walking out. "Hold on a sec," I caught up and asked him, "What did that staff member just say?" "He said you're too naive," Mark replied. I laughed. "And do you think I believe that?" He smoothly answered, "The answer is known only by me, you'll have to believe if you ask." After saying that, he started the car, the wind coming in through the window blowing my hair in front of my face. I leaned back and pressed the window button to block the wind. I'm so tired. If I hadn't been so easygoing and agreed with Gina, I would be at home resting by now. Didn't catch that. What didn't I catch? You're easygoing. I raised a finger to support my cheek and said lightly, "That guy was asking for it. You don't know what he did. My bag throw was just a small warning." Mark drove smoothly, then asked, "Regardless of what he did, did you think about whether you were in a position of advantage or disadvantage before you acted?" I paused and squinted. I do tend to act impulsively, so my mom said she wouldn't be surprised if I ended up in jail one day. Was it really your aunt who said that, nothing else? No, he chuckled twice, and commented, "It's not easy for you to make it this far without any trouble." The car stopped in front of the villa. After I got out carrying the sleeping Bingo, the maid just finished throwing out the trash and pulled me a few steps forward, lowering her voice. "I have something to tell you." "Go ahead." The maid took a while to pull out a crumpled note from her pocket. She unfolded it and handed it to me. It took me some effort to read the note and understand its content. "This is a note left by a woman who visited our house a couple of days ago. I don't know if my husband has contacted her. I trust my husband, but I still feel like I need to tell you." I smiled and said, "I got it. It's late, you should rest early." Upstairs, Mark happened to come out of the bathroom. He was wearing a t-shirt, revealing a slim and attractive waist. Water droplets were still hanging on his abs, his skin was fair, and his flesh was tender. Leaning against the door rail, I tilted my head and said, "You have a great body, no wonder people get mesmerized when they come to your house." He glanced at me as he got dressed, his short hair half dry and half wet, a small beauty mark on his forehead very prominent. This face, back in high school, I had a crush on him for 3 years. And there he stood, unable to come up with a response, and said softly, "What's wrong with you?" I chuckled silently and analyzed, "Mark, many people must want to date you." He casually responded, drying his hair lazily, "What, are you jealous?" "No, not at all. Then why ask?" After 2 seconds of silence, I spoke again, "Do you think I'm pretty?" He focused on drying his hair, looked at me and said, "You're okay." I felt a bit explosive. Okay sounds a bit reluctant as a compliment. He didn't respond, chuckled sarcastically, and then walked past me downstairs. I looked at his back, punched the air in his direction. After taking a shower and coming out, I noticed that the lights downstairs were still on. The housekeeper must have gone to bed, so Mark wasn't asleep yet. I put on a coat and went downstairs. The closer I got to the kitchen, the clearer the sound became, along with a faint fragrance. "Mark?" He responded with a grunt. I opened the door to the kitchen, and saw him in pajamas, stirring something in a bowl with chopsticks. Then he turned off the induction cooker and took out noodles from inside. The noodles smelled great. I couldn't help but lean in to sniff, and unexpectedly glanced at him. "You can actually cook. How could I have survived till now if I couldn't cook?" he said, holding the noodles. I turned back, pulled a chair and sat down, teasing, "I thought guys like you always had a nanny by your side." He also pulled a chair and sat down across from me. "You thought wrong. My dad raised me as if I were a foundling." I was speechless. "Are you going to eat?" he said, picking up a chopstick. The fragrance of the noodles wafted into my nostrils. I swallowed saliva, pinned up my hair and leaned forward. I tilted my head slightly back to avoid touching the chopsticks, but eating like this was a bit awkward. After putting a noodle into my mouth, I wiped my mouth with a tissue and mumbled, "I must have looked ugly just now." Not bad. On Thursday, the manager switched again. It was said that Calvin voluntarily submitted his resignation. His departure made several female colleagues sigh in regret. I, on the other hand, silently celebrated an unofficial party in my heart, but Calvin didn't give up. His determination in pursuing Gina seemed to have resurfaced. He sent me a lot of texts with different numbers in the middle of the night, or waited for me downstairs at my house. I ignored his texts and him. After a few consecutive days, I moved in with Mark for a moment of peace. Over the weekend, when I had a double off day, I woke up naturally. I noticed that Bingo had taken away my hair tie. I scolded it and went downstairs. The little guy seemed very energetic today, running around the house with the hair tie in its mouth. I then noticed a private swimming pool behind the house. The sun was shining brightly today, casting a shimmering light on the pool, looking very inviting. Mark sat on a rattan chair in casual clothes, talking to someone. He was distracted by the commotion here, turned his head back to take a look. He was wearing a coffee-colored duckbill cap, half of his face was shaded, only revealing his crimson lips and a defined shyness. I grabbed Bingo back into my arms. I warned it not to move and then fixed my hair tie, slowly running my fingers through my hair. "What a beautiful lady," a voice said. I looked up to see a man next to Mark, wearing sunglasses, speaking with a cheeky smile. "Hey gorgeous, what are you doing here?" Mark replied on my behalf, "Isn't that odd?" "Of course it's odd." The man playfully patted Mark's shoulder. "When did you have a beautiful girl like this here, your relative?" As he finished speaking, I had just finished tying my hair and picked up Bingo, ready to see Mark's response. Mark didn't say anything, so the man continued, "Hello there, let me introduce myself, I'm Gary. Do you think I'm handsome?" He was wearing a white tank top, had a healthy tan complexion, and wore a silver necklace around his neck. Mark kept silent, probably waiting for my reaction, as the roles were reversed, leaning with his elbow on his knee, wearing a watch on his wrist along with a string of black beads. He smartly twisted his hand. I grinned. "You're quite handsome, but not my type." Gary grinned mischievously. "Come on, I think we'd make a good match." Mark turned to look at him, his neck connecting to his chin, revealing a nicely curved profile. "What about me, do you think I match her?" he asked. Gary looked at both of us and said, "Why do you ask that? She can't possibly be your girlfriend. If not, why is she at my house?" Mark remained quiet for a moment, and then raised his thumb. "Mark, you seem to be keeping your cool with all my teasing." Mark calmly replied, "It's okay, it's not relevant." "What?" Gary turned his head. "She's not my girlfriend." Mark said calmly, "She's the other half on my marriage certificate." I paused for a moment, meeting Gary's shocked gaze, and then smiled. He took a few seconds to compose himself, probably feeling that he had made the situation awkward, or had just received too much surprising information. He rubbed the back of his head and stood up, saying, "I'll head home." As he left, I turned to look at the distant clouds. "Why did you tell him? Now we'll have to explain everything." Mark didn't reply, asking instead, "Did you sleep well last night?" His question puzzled me. "I slept fine, why?" "Nothing," he said, rubbing his forehead, getting up and walking past me. Bingo let out a soft call, hurriedly following him, circling around his legs without getting bored. I furrowed my eyebrows, feeling bewildered. On a rainy Thursday, Mary called me to come home for dinner. I was opening a box of cookies at the time, taking one and putting it in my mouth, and asked nonchalantly, "What's the occasion that you suddenly want me to come back?" She laughed on the other end. "What else could it be? It's me and your dad's anniversary. I made a big table of dishes. Hurry back or else we won't finish them." I looked out the window, raindrops sliding down the glass. "All right, got it." Mark wasn't home today. He went out with his dad for business. I sent him a message, bid Linda farewell, and went out to hail a taxi with an umbrella. As the sky darkened and the rainy night turned cold, the streets were lit with countless lights. At the traffic light intersection, I watched outside the window, holding an umbrella, waiting for the green light along with other pedestrians, mostly in silence, except for a few acquaintances chatting with each other. Among them were two high school students. The boy was half a head taller than the girl, deliberately leaning his umbrella towards her. The girl was talking to him with her head tilted up, and he was listening attentively, occasionally smiling. After listening, he turned back to speak to her, and the girl immediately patted him on the shoulder. When the green light came on, people started crossing the street. I looked away. When I arrived home, the rain showed no sign of stopping. As I entered the house, my coat was soaked, and my mom was just bringing out the final dish from the kitchen, reminding me, "Don't forget to change your slippers." I pushed my hair behind my ear and replied, I know. During dinner, my mom lectured me for half an hour about my being 26 and still not dating anyone. After she finished, she nudged my dad with her elbow and teased, "Ken, are you mute?" My dad gave her a stern look and said, "Why do you care about young people's matters? It's normal for Rachel not to like anyone. My daughter is so beautiful, how can she easily give in to those lousy guys? If she doesn't want to get married, I'll take care of her for the rest of her life." Before I could feel touched by his words, my mom broke the tension by playfully pinching my dad's ear and jokingly scolding him. I chuckled silently on the side, taking a bite of food. Around 10 o'clock, my parents went to bed, leaving me with plenty of instructions before I finally went to my room. After washing the dishes, I was about to take out the trash. Glancing outside, I noticed the rain had stopped, so I quickly changed my shoes. The public trash cans downstairs were full, so I had to walk to the market to throw the garbage. The streets were empty, with occasional cars speeding by. I felt a sense of unease, as if there were footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing. It wasn't until I passed by an alley that a sudden force pushed me inside. My trash bag flew out from the impact, and I held onto the wall, feeling the pain as the footsteps approached. I turned around and met a pair of cold, smiling eyes. "Jack." I took a deep breath and shook my wrist. "Trying to scare me, Jack?" He slightly bent down and said, "Where's your confidence gone? Come on, keep going." I didn't respond, feeling a sense of despair since the alley seemed long and dark, creating an illusion of no end. I had to focus on Jack. Much taller than me, he looked down at me, then raised his hand to slap me. I swiftly dodged, angering him. He grabbed my collar with one hand, pinning me against the wall. Sneering, he asked, "Do you think you can escape tonight?" I gasped and replied sarcastically, "Trying to kill me? Many have tried over the years, but not everyone succeeds. Want to be the first?" He leaned in, his breath brushing across my face. Before he could touch me, I suddenly headbutted his forehead. He stepped back slightly, and I kicked towards him, but he grabbed my ankle. I slapped his face while he momentarily loosened his grip, giving me the opportunity to push him away. Jack grabbed my collar and slammed me against the wall, sneering, "You think I won't do it?" I tilted my head and responded, "Want to try to insult me again?" He pushed me down, and I fought back, leading to a physical altercation between us. Just then, a figure appeared from behind the tall wall. It was Mark, moving swiftly. Jack turned back but was met with a powerful punch directly to his face. Jack, stunned, couldn't say a word, while Mark, with a menacing tone, told him off for his previous actions. Jack, in pain, sincerely apologized, but Mark was visibly angry, reprimanding him for his past behaviors. This enraged version of Mark was a side I hadn't seen before. Jack, swallowing his pride, begged for forgiveness. Mark made it clear that such troublemakers needed to be dealt with appropriately. Mark then turned to me and asked how I was doing. I shook my head, relieved that Mark intervened in time. I expressed my gratitude as we walked out of the alley. Calvin glanced at me, and I didn't dare to move. He then averted his gaze and said, "It's late, Auntie. I have things to do, so you guys should go back." "Oh. Won't you come up and sit for a while?" my mom asked. "No, thank you," he said humbly, "I'll bring gifts next time." As we went upstairs, my mom was ecstatic and kept talking about how much she liked him. "He's much more handsome than the boys you dated in high school. Tell me how things are progressing between you two," my mom kept asking since that night. I told her he's a busy person. Mark then added my mom's contact and sincerely said he was preparing gifts to visit them. I stood in front of his room, feeling puzzled. This won't benefit either of us. If we break up, I won't be able to eat for 3 days. Mark put on his clothes and casually asked, "If it's not good for you, what about me?" "My mom will probably spit on you next time she sees you. That's scary," he laughed, putting on his coat. I raised my hand, "I'm not joking. In any case, you can't go." He turned to me, saying, "If I don't go, I'd be rude and untrustworthy." "Rachel, your mom seems to like me. Do you think I can really not go?" I hesitated. He then asked, "You stay here." "Where are you going?" "To the office," he said. Around 9:30, I was trying to trim my bangs, hands shaking, when Mark suddenly called. I answered the phone, and amid some background noise, a somewhat familiar male voice said, "Is that you? Come over, Mark's a bit drunk." It was that guy from the pool, Gary. Mark drunk? I doubted that. "He's quiet now, isn't it obvious he's drunk?" Gary said. I walked over and patted Mark's shoulder. "Do you even recognize me?" Gary left, and Mark nodded. I took his hand. "Let's go." "Where?" "Back home." "Are you planning to sleep here?" "First, we're going to the government for what?" "Divorce." I blurted out, so sudden. "You don't want to?" Smirking, he said, "I promised you." When I didn't respond, he continued, "You like me?" Surprised, I gasped, "Absurd." He quickly added, "I promise you too." I chuckled, "Okay, fine, I'll humor you in your tipsy state." Then I grabbed his arm and he closed his eyes. Gary drove us home, and when we got home, I wanted to ask the maid to make some sobering soup, but I remembered she had taken the day off. I helped Mark upstairs before going down to the kitchen. As I was carrying the sobering soup to Mark's room, I told him to get up and drink it. He murmured, then turned over. "Remember to drink it," I reminded him before going to get some fresh clothes for him. But just a few minutes into the shower, the power went out, and the water stopped. Normally calm, I was relieved I hadn't applied shower gel. With my phone in the room, I had to feel my way in the dark. When I called out Mark's name at his door, he responded, "Power's out," I quipped. A rustling sound followed, and Mark got out of bed. Anxious, I said, "Why are you getting out of bed?" "Use your phone's flashlight." Ignoring me, he walked towards me, stumbled, and sat on the floor. Suppressing a laugh, I went to help him up, but when I saw his thin sleepwear brushing against exposed underwear at his back, I stopped laughing. Then, to my surprise, he grabbed my hand and pulled me down with him, his scent engulfing me, a hint of alcohol mixed in. I tried to get up, but felt a cold touch behind my ear, and before I knew it, he was holding my neck and pulling me in for a slow kiss, wrapping me in his arms so I couldn't move. My mind went blank, forgetting everything except for this surreal, unforgettable night. The next morning, I woke up to a bright room and a pounding headache. Checking my phone, I realized it was already 1 p.m. I groaned at the thought of Mark being tipsy. Sitting up, still not wanting to move, I finally accepted reality and got up downstairs. There was a bowl of warm congee on the table. The housekeeper passed by holding a broom and said, "You're a lucky one. The mister is making breakfast for you." He better be. When Mark brought the noodles, I was focusing on my congee, not saying a word. He placed the noodles in front of me, saying softly, "Finish it." I scoffed, "Am I a pig? How can I finish all of this?" He picked up a bite with the chopsticks, "Then let me help you." Quick to stop him, I said, "What are you doing?" "I can't eat after you." My voice trailed off. When Mark looked at me, a smile playing on his lips, I blushed and returned to my congee. Mark ate the bite he picked up. Internally, I cursed at him for being shameless. After breakfast, Mark drove me to the office, and we both tacitly avoided mentioning what happened the night before. In the office, I found myself daydreaming several times, occasionally checking my neck in the mirror, worried about any visible marks. In the afternoon, Gina shared a post from a blogger with me. Gina said, "Look up a blog post from her 3 years ago, with the keyword lost soul." I did as she suggested. After searching, several posts appeared, one with the most likes and unique content, featuring only a black and white filtered photo. In the night at a basketball court, the angle of the street lamp was bright, capturing mostly the guy in the frame, his profile showing as he chatted with someone. He had a natural air of elegance, a rare smile tugging at his lips. The post had a whopping 423,000 likes, with comments asking for the guy's social media account. Without thinking, I clicked on the photo, glanced at it for a couple of seconds, then saved it. Just then, Gina messaged me, 3 years ago, Mark's private life was disturbed after this post went viral. People were trying to find his social media through just a photo, but Mark's parents quickly put a stop to that. Gina found the post because the blogger didn't want to lose the traffic, so they made it private for 2 years before reposting it. I typed back, "You found this?" She replied, "I just randomly searched and found it, wanted to show you how handsome Mark is." I couldn't help but ask, "Do you still like Mark?" "Times have changed, I only admire him now, wish you both happiness." A smile played on my lips, then after a while, I earnestly replied, "Thank you, Gina." She asked again, "By the way, has Calvin contacted you?" "No, I blocked him a long time ago. Seems like he moved abroad." "Doesn't matter to me, some chapters have closed, but it's nothing to do with me." Coming home on a rainy night was accompanied by thunder. I held an umbrella, waiting at the traffic light. While waiting, a girl next to me complained about her friend's bad temper, making me pause. I realized I was the same. Rachel was never known for her good temper, her strange and off-putting personality, crushing on Calvin from the same class. Rumors had it. This first impression made people overlook the school's annual results, where she always ranked higher than Calvin. It was Calvin's hard work that got them into the same college during the national exams. She looked down on someone like Calvin, indecisive, wavering, not distinguishing between family and shopping priorities. Her dream lover was like the heroes she read about in storybooks, the aloof yet gentle young man. With a sword in hand, he would rid the poor villagers of their pain, then lead them towards the light, turning back to reach out to the girl he loved, smiling like the sun, exceptionally beautiful. The light turned green. The rain continued to fall lightly. Cars lined up waiting, pedestrians crossed the road. As I stepped onto the wet pavement, I saw a familiar figure across the street. It was Mark, holding an umbrella, his face illuminated by passing car lights reminded of that post. Comparing the side profile to his current look, the green in his eyes had faded, but his features were striking. Mark said, "Rachel, you walk so slowly." Then he lowered his eyes and smiled a couple of times, looking genuinely happy. As if my presence made him exceptionally joyful. The hero I had imagined so many times seemed to overlap with the smiling face before me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, braving the cold wind. "Waiting for you." "Wait for me to do what?" "Wait for you to come to me." Some seeds, once planted, emerge at a certain moment. The feelings I had for you grew stronger until you responded, clarifying what had been bothering me recently. This was love. A kind of crazy joy once love was recognized. Epilogue: I met Rachel in winter. After arguing with my father at home, I left quietly with Bingo, the dog my mom insisted on naming Linda. She thought Bingo was a girl and wanted to dress her up, a thought I constantly rejected since the name was already pitiful. I had to protect it. While walking, my mom caught up and handed me a sandwich, her eyes fixed on me. "Have your breakfast." Just me and the dog, we went out. The wind, though not strong, kept blowing, disturbing the meal. As I passed by a trash can, I stopped, thinking of finishing the meal before continuing. Bingo couldn't stay still, roaming around. I let it run around while I ate quietly and attentively until Bingo's sound made me look up. It was noon then, despite the presence of the sun, it still lacked warmth. Half of me stayed behind the dark clouds, outlining a faint edge. She stood opposite, her eyes lifting as she was about to step on Bingo unconsciously, then she lightly frowned. Her hair was shoulder length, her eyes pale like mist, in a gray coat, tall and slim, with a straight nose. Beautiful, was what came to mind. After finishing the last bit, I tugged on the leash, and Bingo came back. She immediately apologized, showing signs of being out of breath. I shook my head, ready to turn around, then Linda's yelling came from a distance, scarier than any horror movie. "Bingo, run!" I said. We circled around and hid in a bubble tea shop. I noticed her following closely, clearly exhausted and out of breath. "Why were you following us?" I asked. She looked puzzled, as if my words were strange. But without saying anything, she wiped her sweat, got up, and started to leave. Just as she was about to stand up, many thoughts crossed my mind. I remembered why I ran upon hearing Linda's voice. I remembered the reason for the argument with my dad this morning. Then I thought of my mom always looking at me as if something terrible was about to happen. I grabbed her arm. "Are you single?" She seemed equally confused. "What?" I said, "Marry me." This is just a one-sided request and inquiry from me, but suddenly I thought it would be nice to find someone to help me deceive my family. If she doesn't agree, I will voluntarily leave with Bingo. But then I felt insincere with my words, like I arrogantly asked this question, and any normal person would want to punch me. So I quickly added, 2 million. This is to compensate for the losses caused by our marriage registration. If she still doesn't agree, I will stop this absurd idea and go back to arguing with my parents. But she turned around, squatted down, and said, "Fine, handsome." That's when I noticed her eyes were a light brown color. "Let me introduce myself, I'm Rachel." I, who usually don't care much about names, repeated it in my mind several times out of respect for her. On the day of our marriage, the weather unexpectedly turned out to be good. Rachel sat quietly in the passenger seat, arms crossed, looking out of the window. The wind blowing in through the car window lifted her hair. I couldn't help but ask, "If you regret it, you can say so." Anytime she shook her head. "No," I counted, "there are a total of 56 trees on this street from where we started to now." After completing the marriage registration, she began to show signs of nervousness. Especially the staff around us kept glancing at her and me. She leaned towards me and whispered, "Did I not do my makeup well today?" "No, are you worried about that?" "Of course, even though I didn't mean it. After all, this is the first time I've done this in my many years, so it has to be delicately done." I didn't say anything. But the staff said, "You look so good when you smile, so remember to smile later." Rachel turned to look at me. I looked down at her. "Are you sure she smiled just now?" She seemed skeptical. "How come you're not questioning if she saw it wrong?" I replied calmly. The staff grinned and said, "You two look really good together, and you look even better when you smile, so I suggest you smile more." So when the photographer raised the camera, Rachel held onto my arm, tilted her head on my shoulder, and smiled. I just looked calmly at the camera. When the photos came out, she was very satisfied with herself and pointed at me, saying, "You're so cold." I glanced at it, took my copy, and looked at her. "During this period, we won't disturb each other. I won't restrict you in any way. When the time is right, we can part ways." She nodded and said okay. Then she raised her hand to fix her hair, revealing a clear jawline. After leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau, she walked lazily, playing with the file in her hand. As we descended the steps, she asked, "Are you going to take me home?" "Get in the car," I replied. When my parents saw Rachel's photos, they fell silent for a moment. Linda turned her head first and said, "Did you find a little star to fool us, Dad and me?" I placed the marriage certificate on the table. "Mark? You secretly took a little girl to register without telling us?" My dad was angry. "No." I knocked on the table, keeping a straight face. "We've been in a relationship for a while, but I didn't inform you due to too many uncertainties. If everything is confirmed and you're in a hurry, we went to register." "So, are you not having a wedding?" my mom asked angrily. I paused and said, "It's cold now, I want to wait until the weather gets warmer to hold a ceremony." I looked at her. She smiled mischievously, as if she had a devious plan in mind. "I'll remind you when the time comes." During this time, except for needing to take Rachel home, we rarely contacted each other. I wasn't worried about the cohabitation issue being discovered since I lived alone. This went on for about 2 years. And during these 2 years, Linda was busy with her own affairs and didn't pay much attention to me. She and her husband had just returned from out of town and called me to stay at my place for a night. It was at this moment that Rachel's phone rang. She had always helped me with acting in the past, and this time it was my turn. I casually asked, "What do I need to do?" She lowered her voice on the other end, "Just act as my husband, it's simple. Help me, and I'll pay you $100. I paused for a moment, then smiled and agreed, "Okay." When I called, I didn't know what the situation was on her end, only that she said the more exaggerated, the better, to have a face-slapping effect. I suddenly understood. After it was done, I took her home. I reminded her to be careful in front of Linda, so she wouldn't find any loopholes. She nodded and asked me to leave while lifting her chin. I glanced at her, didn't say anything, just turned and went inside to grab a set of women's pajamas and threw it to her. She quickly caught it and remarked, "You seem to be living pretty well, having everything prepared for me already." The next day when I returned home, my mom again mentioned wanting to meet her daughter-in-law, and glared at me. "It's been 2 years, why haven't you made any progress?" I calmly said, "It's too early, we haven't made any plans yet." She muttered something under her breath, then said, "Forget it, you stay put. I'll go make lunch for Rachel, and you can take it to her." But I had never been to her workplace. At most I had dropped her off a couple of times and knew where the company was located. As I stood at the company entrance with the lunch box, ready to call her, someone called out to me. "Mark, you're here?" She drawled. I recognized her as the person who was sitting in the passenger seat opposite me that day. Apparently, she was one of the people who needed to be put in her place. So, I calmly replied, "I'm here to deliver lunch to my wife." She paused for a moment and then smiled, "Great, come with me, I'll take you to her." "Thank you." She led me to the second floor in the elevator and then hesitated. After walking straight ahead, I looked ahead. I hadn't made an effort to find out who this man was or what his name was since that night. All I knew was, in Rachel's words, he was her nemesis. At this moment, the damn guy is forcibly holding her, covering her mouth, and whispering something. If he's saying harsh words, it fits the scene. But if he's saying sweet words, really ridiculous. I glanced around, casually picked up the slingshot on the table, shot a paper ball towards him. When he looked over holding his head, he saw me teasingly smiling. A thought popped into my head: if this is the romantic rival situation, then I'm really dealing with a grade school question. Didn't want to waste time here, so I just called Rachel out and handed her the lunchbox. Didn't ask much else, because that's her business, not mine. After finishing the task, I just left. Later that night, Gary called me to play pool. He brought his girlfriend, who brought her sister. I didn't pay much attention to them, but when her sister came over as I was about to take a shot, she handed me a tissue. I didn't take it, just looked at her, gestured to speak up. She put the tissue back in her bag, tentatively asked, "Is Rachel your wife?" She smoothed her bangs. I went to the same high school as her. Funny coincidence, you know. We were quite surprised when we found out about you too, especially since she was always around Calvin back then. Calvin was the heartthrob of our school. I interrupted her. The heartthrob at your school was that bad? She was speechless for a moment, then smiled faintly. Everyone has different tastes, but I find it strange. She used to be so into Calvin, they even dated. How come she's suddenly married to you? Passing the cue stick to the person on my right, taking a sip of water from the table, I looked up and asked her, "What was Rachel's relationship with you back then?" "Not very familiar." She pondered for a moment. "If you're not very familiar, why are you so curious about her?" I asked sharply. "Isn't your curiosity a bit exhausting?" She hesitated and couldn't answer. After a while, she said, "I just wanted to chat with you about her past. She and Calvin seemed really compatible back then, but I don't know why they broke up." I nodded. "You should ask Calvin then, he knows better." She quieted for a moment, then smiled and said, "I just wanted to kindly remind you, Rachel wasn't well liked at our school back then. Heard that after years of university, she finally caught Calvin's eye. Be careful in many aspects with your marriage." Her elaborate storytelling made me interested. Holding the water bottle, I stared at her with a raised eyebrow and asked seriously, "You don't need to beat around the bush with me. Instead of talking about how much Rachel liked Calvin, why don't you say something practical, like how Rachel's grades were at your school, and what grand gestures she made to pursue Calvin?" She was speechless for a moment. Her grades were actually pretty good back then, and she just stuck by his side to follow him. Isn't that enough? Not enough. I put down the water bottle, found a place to sit down, calmly analyzed. "You say my wife really liked Calvin. I don't see it. She seems more annoyed by him. Secondly, you say her grades were good back then. How good exactly?" "I bet you can't say because you only care about whose backup she was, who she followed every day, and nothing else. They both got into the same university. You definitely think it was Rachel chasing after Calvin. Why don't you think it could be Calvin pursuing Rachel and making efforts to get into the same school?" She seemed to find it ridiculous, lightly spreading her hands. "Because Rachel liked Calvin, of course, she was the one pursuing him." "You're adamant that Rachel liked Calvin. Have you seen her confess to him, or publicly show her affection for him?" I pointed out, "We are married, but she's not patient, especially with men. Calvin just came back from abroad the other day and she hasn't even acknowledged him. Instead, it's that guy who keeps bothering her." Looking at her puzzled look, I continued, "So if you make such definite conclusions based on surface observations like you, then I could also analyze these days and say that it's actually Calvin who's been bothering my wife, and my wife can't stand him." You may want to argue with that, but the words come from me. What can you do about it? Her face turned ugly because of my words. Couldn't respond for a while. I leisurely got up, leaving her with one last sentence. "Keep all your thoughts to yourself. You came to talk to me today. I'm teaching you a lesson. If you don't understand it, you're foolish. If you understand and still choose to be foolish, then you have a long way ahead of you." That's all I had to say. I walked away towards the pool table, not giving her another glance. I always viewed Rachel as a professional relationship, but after tonight, I suddenly felt a bit protective of her. These subtle thoughts continued when I took her to celebrate my mother's birthday. Until she got drunk. As a skunk, I'd only heard of such low alcohol tolerance from others. Now I was witnessing it firsthand. Soon enough, I realized that her getting drunk was nothing compared to being called Mom for over 20 years. Those subtle thoughts completely vanished with this incident. I thought that tonight was probably going to be a sleepless night, and it turned out to be just that. When Rachel went crazy and tried to kiss me on the neck. And she had no reaction to her own rogue behavior, just fell asleep like an unfaithful person. Left me in the living room for half an hour. I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, my ears burning, feeling like I was running a fever, had to pick up my phone and mindlessly browse through apps one by one. Finally, I landed on a high school graduation photo of Rachel back in the day. Suddenly, my mind became clear. She stood second from the end on the right side, her face looking more naive than now, a slightly expressionless face. Short hair at shoulder length, with a neat bangs, beautiful features emitting a cool vibe, hands in pockets looking cold, and behind her, Calvin was smirking, his hand resting on her shoulder. I chuckled softly, such an obvious stance, only idiots would believe you had a crush on him for years. It wasn't until around 3 in the morning that I finally fell asleep. I rarely suffer from insomnia, but I hadn't been sleeping well lately. Especially during these nights when Rachel was with me, nightmares haunted me, always dreaming about talking to her in the dream. Talking was not the issue. But often, the conversation escalated. This led to more severe insomnia, waking up suddenly in the middle of the night, having trouble falling back asleep, with my mind filled with thoughts of her. I wanted to ask her if she had the same dream, but couldn't directly ask if she dreamt about me. So, I asked her if she had been sleeping well lately. When she said yes, I felt even more depressed. After that, being around her became very awkward. Sometimes I would unconsciously avoid her gaze, and even a slight accidental touch would make me feel numb. That night when I got drunk, I deliberately had Gary call her, because I suddenly wanted to see her. When she arrived, even though I wasn't sober, I felt content. Maybe I fell into a trap. When we got home and the power went out, I lost my rationality again when she reached out to me. From the tips of my ears to my earlobes, I felt a burning sensation. I held her hand, pulled her closer, kissed her, and the sound of countless kisses echoed in my ears. "Rachel," I called out. She responded. "Are you going to sleep?" I asked as I stroked her forehead. She fell silent for a moment and then softly said, "Then let's sleep." I smiled, and as I smiled, I went to kiss her. At that moment, I understood. Suddenly, everything became clear to me about what I was doing and why I was doing it. This is how it feels to like someone. Making eye contact with her made me want to hide, and I could sensitively perceive even the slightest unintentional touch, reacting in an exaggerated way. I am not sure how many times my ears turned red tonight, but it was definitely because of her. My heart pounded all night as if struck by Cupid's arrow, with Rachel written on it, piercing straight into my heart. Some things can't be postponed, so I deliberately waited for her to finish work to express my feelings to her. I'm not good at confessing, I've never done it before. I searched online for keywords for a long time, but all the results seemed either too cheesy or too cliché. Rachel soon arrived holding an umbrella. She seemed a bit surprised when she saw me and asked why I was there. I replied, "I'm waiting for you." She then asked, "Waiting for me to do what?" I instinctively responded, "Waiting for you to come to me." That sentence seemed to touch her, and she blushed all the way back. Apart from me, no one knows how adorable she looks with flushed cheeks. Back in the room, she briefly analyzed the situation between us. "So, are we staying together or not?" "We are staying together. I've locked the marriage certificate in the box," I said. She paused for a moment, chuckled briefly, raised her finger with a look of disbelief, then reached out for the oranges on the table. As she peeled them, in a nonsensical manner, she asked me if I had ever liked someone before. I said no. She found it hard to believe. I turned my head, looked into her eyes, and said firmly, "I really haven't liked anyone before, except for you." "What about you? Have you never liked anyone until now?" "No," I replied quickly and decisively, fixing my gaze on her. "I really haven't liked anyone before, only you." "What about you?" We remained silent for a few seconds. She looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and was about to argue, but my sincere expression defeated her doubts. She said, "Well, then I guess you're quite impressive." I tilted my head and felt a bit annoyed, picked up my phone from the table, leaned back into the sofa, and replied calmly, "I'm not impressive, you just have a rich emotional life." She continued, I haven't even said anything yet. Linda told me some of your secrets. I raised an eyebrow. She held the orange, looked at me, and continued, your sister told me that when you were a child, many girls kissed you. She chuckled, then burst into a loud laughter. She was laughing so hard, almost banging on the table. Laughing like that, was she trying to drive me crazy? But no matter what, it only lasted a few minutes. What could I do with Rachel? I love her to death. I willingly surrender myself to her.